So one of the unintended consequences of the Black Lives Matter movement is that there is an increased scrutiny about the pop culture that we consume. Who makes it, who watches it, who distributes it, and why are these pieces important? Now, I think a lot of this is a performance and a distraction from the main point of the movement, which is that systemic abuse and violence against Black people must stop. But I guess we can have a few conversations at the same time, as long as we don't lose sight of the main conversation. I really wanted to talk about Gone with the Wind, which is one of these topics, because I don't know if you've been following the news, but they pulled the film from streaming, and then they said they would put it back with a note or a disclaimer that contextualized the things that were being shown in the film. And as you can imagine, there was a predictable mix of like, who cares versus, oh my God, all our sacred objects are being torn away from us. And it was all very manufactured and silly, and it was a tempest in a teacup. And like I said, it was a distraction and a performance. But I did want to talk about Gone with the Wind because I have a very long and close history with that book. And for that, I need to tell you a story. So it begins when I was 8 years old and my Auntie Lily came to visit. Auntie Lily was a cousin of my dad's, and she was the most fearless person that I had ever met. She came from this large family of half-Irish siblings who had all decided not to marry and instead follow intellectual pursuits. They all had PhDs and they wrote books and they traveled the world, and I thought they were awesome. Auntie Lily was actually visiting my Lilaka, who is another one of my dad's cousins, and was, for a great many years, she was my stand-in grandma. And my mother was also very fond of them, and one day we all went out shopping, and we ended up at a bookstore because Auntie Lily was a great reader. And my mom asked her for a recommendation. You know, she was like, Lily, I know you love to read, so what should I be reading? You should tell me. And I still remember Auntie Lily looking at my mom and then sort of humming to herself, and then came back with a list of books that can only be described as the Housewives special. It was things like A Woman of Substance and Gone with the Wind and a couple of other things that I don't remember. It cracks me up because my mother does not read books. I think it took her 2 years to finish the last one that she started. But she does love to read a good magazine. I asked her about the last book that she was reading, and she said, I'm savoring it. I don't even know if she finished it. But anyway, she brought the books back home and she was showing it to my brother, and my brother was just looking at them and going like, well? And my brother is a lot older than I am, and he loves the movies. And he picked up the copy of Gone with the Wind and he looked at the cover, which is a still from the movie. So it's Clark Gable and Vivien Leigh. And it's the scene where Frank has died and Rhett Butler is visiting Scarlett to offer his condolences and ends up telling her that they're going to get married. And my brother looked at the cover and he said something that I can't quite remember, but it was something along the lines of her being crazy like an otter or something. There's some kind of animal involved and a suggestion of insanity. Now, he said this while he was flipping through the last section of the book, so I thought he was actually quoting something that had been written in the book. And being a precocious child, I thought, oh, I should find that passage because it sounds weird. Now, what I didn't know at the time was that he was quoting Laurence Olivier, who was talking about Lee's mental health issues. And I kind of hope he put it more politely and kindly than my brother remembered it, because, like I said, I can't remember the exact phrase, but it's a kind of awful thing to say about anybody. Anyway, so I took the book because my mom sure as hell wasn't going to read it, and I started reading the end of it, you know, the last section, maybe the last 200 pages or something, and just flipping through it and trying to find the phrase, and I couldn't, and so I just kept going back further and further in an attempt to find that phrase, and I ended up reading the entire book. Obviously, I'm 8 years old. This is the first adult book that I've read. I don't understand everything in it. But here's the thing, this is also the first book that I fell in love with. When you go from reading children's literature and fairy tales to reading something like this, it is a massive shift of the imagination. The most complicated male character that I'd read was Beast in Beauty and the Beast, and then all of a sudden, here's Rhett Butler. And he's morally gray, and he lives on the edges of society, and he does things like war profiteering. I didn't even know what a war was, much less that you could profiteer. And there's Scarlet, who within the first line is described as somebody who's not beautiful, but with a power all her own. And she does terrible things, and she does amazing things, and she is determined and obstinate and a real survivor. And I'd never come across a woman like that in my reading. And here was this world, the world of the South before the war. And so much of it translated culturally to the culture that I'm from. Obviously, at 8 years old, I couldn't make intellectual correlations, but I could understand at a very familiar and deep, innate level the ideas that Mitchell was writing about in this book. What the rural community is like, the bonds between the families, family pride, genteel, unhappy marriages. These are not ideas that are foreign to the Indian existence. So this was both a world that I didn't know and didn't really understand, but also a world that was familiar. And I would read these things and, all those descriptions of the war. And Mitchell is a very good writer. She can build these emotional connections between her characters and the audience, and she does it very well. If you're only going to publish one novel, Gone with the Wind is a pretty good effort. I went on to read and reread this book over the next 4 or 5 years, and I was obsessed with it. I watched the film, I talked about it, I would look up things about the actors. I thank God every day that we didn't have the internet back then, because I would have been an insufferable 8-year-old. And when I was 9, I got really sick, so I was confined to the bed for a few months, and I didn't have much to do and I couldn't really move. So I read a lot, and one of the books that I reread was Gone with the Wind. It was always there by my bedside. And like I've said before, my parents didn't really care what I was reading as long as it wasn't something too out there. And Auntie Lily had recommended this to my mom, so my mom was like, yeah, sure, read Gone with the Wind. But as I was growing older, I was also getting exposed to other literature and to other ideas, and I slowly began to notice certain things about this book. The first thing that occurred to me was the use of the N-word, because this book is just liberal, not in politics, but with the use of the N-word. I was also kind of side-eyeing the appearance of the KKK, which was not an organization that I knew because I was an 8-year-old on the other side of the world, but it kind of seemed off to me that these rich dudes would just band together and become a vigilante group. And then as the years passed, I began to understand more about the book and about its setting and the ideas and what Mitchell was trying to establish with it. I also understood its impact in whitewashing that entire era, which was one of Mitchell's aims, definitely. I found out about the KKK, I found out about the slurs that are used in this book. I found out, perhaps most egregiously, I found out about the Mammy character. I think the Mammy character is what really bothers me the most about this book, because the body of the black woman in this novel, the way it is portrayed, the way she is used to further the plot and to support the main white characters, it is disgusting when you think about it. Mammy doesn't even have a name, she's just Mammy, and then she's turned into this good slave who refuses to leave her slaveholder family because of loyalty. And there are passages in the novel where Scarlet is explicitly thinking about the slaves who have been freed and now live with her and refuse to leave her. And she thinks of them as being like good, almost human people. And there are these passages that she uses to talk about the young slave girl Prissy, and she calls her stupid and she treats her like a pack animal. And she really pushes this narrative of a pre-war South where the slaves were so happy to be working in the fields and to be serving their masters, and how the KKK is really just a concerned citizen society. It's just vile. There's this entire sequence where Scarlett is this very hardworking businesswoman, and she won't shut up and sit at home and die of poverty like the rest of her peers, for which she is despised, by the way. The gender politics in this is quite special, but I think to give Mitchell her due, she did admire Scarlett and she wanted Scarlett to be a go-getter. But Scarlett basically gets assaulted by a black freed slave, and a bunch of the men in the community, including Ashley Wilkes, who is her milquetoast love. I was going to say lover, but he's too milquetoast to be her lover, so you know, the object of her affections. And Ashley Wilkes is basically the most useless character ever written in all literature. Literally can't do anything right. And he joins the KKK so that they can go kill this person. And obviously things go sideways because they're a bunch of idiots, racist, murderous idiots. And everybody shames Scarlett for it. And the way it's described, you know, it's about poor sweet darlings, what else could they do to exert their masculinity? Get out there and get a job. So for these and other reasons, I feel like if you are choosing to read Gone with the Wind in 2020, then you need to be aware of all these things. You need to do your proper research. You need to go online and read what people have written about this book, because a lot of people have written about this book because it has been one of the more significant pieces of PR for the Civil War, or for the South in the Civil War. And the amount of whitewashing that it does to history, it's incredible. I personally know people who think it's the gospel truth, and it is ridiculous. I haven't reread this book in years, and I think I never will, which makes me sad, I'm not going to lie, you know, like you can't have something that is so embroiled within your memory of who you used to be and the people that you love. I mean, I spoke about this in my video about reading your problematic faves, but when people say that they love a book, it's tied into so many layers of emotions and who they were at a particular point in time. Your experience with the book is never about just the book itself, it's within a larger context. But I will say that finding out about the problems with Gone with the Wind, it hasn't invalidated all the feelings that I've had around this book. You can't take away my memories of Auntie Lily or Lilaka, or of the many hours that I saw Auntie Lily sitting in our living room knocking back the vodka like a boss. You can't take away those hours when I was ill and I was in pain and this book was my only escape. You can't take away the hours that I spent discussing this book with my friends. You can't take away my memory of all those things, and I refuse to let it be poisoned by this book. If it hadn't been this book, it would have been something else. And so I choose to focus on the people around me, on the context in which this book was dear. And I have no problems whatsoever in throwing this book right out in the bin. I also feel like when a lot of people talk about how culturally significant this book is, they're really just talking about the film, which is a technological and cultural milestone in American history. And I'm happy to talk about it at a later date, but with regards to this book, I kind of think of it as a literary cul-de-sac, because I don't really see the book as having had as much of an impact. When people reference Gone with the Wind and they reference ideas or concepts, those are all stills from the movie. The reason why plantation weddings are popular in the United States is not because they've all read Gone with the Wind. It's because they've seen those iconic stills from the movie where Scarlett is flouncing out of Tara. So should you be reading Gone with the Wind in 2020? No. It's a historical oddity. Let it die in the past. Are you a bad person if you still love this book in 2020? No, but I think you need to question yourself, like what is it that you love so much about it? What does it do for you emotionally that other books don't? How do you reconcile with the racism and the violence and the cruelty and the way it tries to negate the pain and the suffering of millions of people? Books are ideas, and ideas deserve to be questioned. For more videos, please hit the subscribe button.